So welcome to the Oakmont Sunday Symposium on Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. We have a fascinating discussion this morning on beavers, and I'm going to turn it over in a moment to Gabriel to introduce our speakers. And a reminder to everybody that next Sunday, we're going to have Paul Gullickson, who is the spokesman for the county, who will be updating us with regard to all of the elements of the county's response to COVID, including where are they with vaccinations and questions like what the conditions have to be before facilities can be reopened. So I assume that those are of some interest to everyone. With that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Gabriel to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, George. We're thrilled, excuse me, we're thrilled to welcome two outstanding beaver experts to our symposium on Valentine's Day. I was too slow to snag an outdoor reservation for my wife and myself, but am delighted that we were able to line up two renowned advocates for beavers, the conservationists who mate for life. Dr. Heidi Perryman and Bob Boucher will help us understand the vital role that beavers play in our streams, ecosystems, health, and our romantic imaginations. Heidi is a child psychologist who was inspired to start her advocacy of beaver conservation by the dam beavers built in her urban stream in the city of Martinez across the bridge from us. She is the savior of those and many of our local beavers, the founder of Worth the Dam without an N, and the organizer of popular annual beaver festivals to help us celebrate the importance of beavers in our West Coast environments. Bob Boucher, who joins us from Milwaukee, is a watershed resource management ecologist who spearheaded major land trusts in Wisconsin and explored ecosystems and climbed remote mountains around the world. Bob is one of my wife's and my few summer home neighbors, only 2 miles away through old growth forests, which his wife's family have helped protect for many decades. Around the Lake Superior preserved by the Huron Mountain Club. He serves as an expert advocate of the role for beavers in Midwestern ecosystems and is now launching an exciting new initiative for a multi-state binational effort to conserve the Lake Superior region. Thank you both for joining us. I now dive down and ask Heidi to emerge and take over.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm really happy to be here and to talk about the work that we did in Martinez to cooperate with the beavers that moved into our town. Just so you know, Martinez is not very far away. It's about 40 miles northeast of San Francisco, and it's right on the Carquinez Strait. So it gets water from the strait that makes it tidal, and a freshwater creek flows through town. That's Alhambra Creek, and that's where the beavers moved. They came in, they took down some trees, and they built a dam and a lodge. Now, the city was concerned about the particular location of this dam. They were worried that it was going to elevate the risk of flooding in an area that was already prone to flooding. But as these beavers that came in, dad beaver and a mom beaver, historically, Martinez has flooded from that creek. But as you can see, these are fairly easy to see beavers. So all the children on the way to school, all the lawyers on the way to the courtroom, all the businessmen looking for a place to park, everybody could see these beavers, and people got really engaged with them. It wasn't uncommon in those days to see families with children gathered at the dam sites, at the bridges to watch them. In fact, you could go to Starbucks, buy your morning latte, and you could actually watch them play. Now, this, you could even hear them. Beavers make kind of a low whining when they're young, like a child crying. And it was this sound more than anything else that got me involved. I thought, gosh, if I don't do something to stop them from being killed, when am I ever going to hear that sound again? So I thought, okay, maybe I'll work on it for a weekend, maybe for a week. How long could this possibly take? Well, that was 13 years ago, and my life pretty much changed since then. Because of the interest that the public had in the beavers, there was a lot of media attention. And at one time, we were even on national Fox News. I was hopeful about all this attention because I thought maybe it would slow the city down in the decision that it made and make them a little more cautious about what they decided to do. There was going to be a big meeting to discuss the fate of these beavers. So many people were expected in City Hall that they couldn't have the meeting in City Hall. It had to be held in the high school, Alhambra Performing Arts Center. So that meeting was in November of 2007, and about 200 people showed up. They came from uptown, downtown, and out of town. And they said pretty much with one voice, we do not want you to kill these beavers, find another way. It was an amazing meeting. I sometimes describe it as the last 5 minutes of It's a Wonderful Life combined with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It was that good. The Sierra Club was there. The Humane Society was there. The superintendent of schools said he would pay for students to plant trees to replace the ones the beavers took. Faced with that kind of massive public outcry, the city council did pretty much what city councils often do, which is to appoint a subcommittee to study the issue further. Now, I got to be on that subcommittee. We had a plan of 90 days to decide whether it was possible to coexist with beavers in an urban setting. And the first thing we did was address the issue of dam height. And we addressed that by bringing in this gentleman here. This is Skip Lyle. He is the inventor of the Beaver Deceiver, and he came in from Vermont, and he installed a flow device at the dam. Now, the way the flow device works is it moves the water from upstream to downstream in such a way that the water loss is disguised from the beavers. That thing that looks like a cage is not a cage for the beavers. It's a cage for the pipe, because if it wasn't there, the beavers would plug that pipe. And since this was installed in the very first days of 2008, nobody in Martinez has worried about flooding from beavers. This entirely solved our problem. Now, way back in 2008, this was very hard to do. We had to bring in somebody from all the way across the country. But there are experts in California that can do this work, and you actually have 2 flow devices installed in Sonoma right now. So it is much more a doable and understood thing. We learned a lot about beavers because of the opportunity we had in Martinez. And one of the things we first had to understand is that beavers kind of are mammals like us, but they breathe air, but they live in the water. And they do that with a lot of specialized adaptations. Starting with, a beaver can hold its breath for up to 15 minutes, which is about 4 times as long as a river otter. They are kind of little submarines when they go underwater. They have ear flaps that close, nostrils that close. They even have a second valve behind their mouth so that if they're carrying a stick or something, they never get water down their throat. When beavers are working, their front paws are grasping like a raccoon's, and their back paws are webbed like a duck's. So they really are adapted uniquely to the life they live in the water. I'm showing you footage now of our mom beaver working on the dam, and you can see she does that by walking on her hind feet, carrying mud and sticks above her paws, and under her chin. And she'll do this over and over again until it has the level of insulation she thinks her family needs. Now, I call this mom beaver. How the heck would I know? Because beavers are monomorphs. You can't tell the boys and girls apart, except for when the female's breastfeeding. And then she has visible teats. So when mom had visible teats, we were able to notice that she also happened to have a little scar in her tail. And that was important because the community, every time I saw that tail, we knew it was mom. And that was how we followed the cast of characters and learned who was who as the family changed. During the time the beavers lived with us, we got to see a lot of social behavior. Beavers do a lot of interacting. Here's mom grooming a kit. They're very involved parents. Both parents raise the kids. This is footage of dad beaver carrying 2 babies on his back, teaching them how to dive and swim. And here are 2 of our 2 yearlings in 2008 engaged in mutual grooming, which you can see feels fantastic. During the time that the beavers lived in Martinez, we had 27 kits born in Alhambra Creek. And you might be thinking, oh my goodness, what'd they do with 27 beavers? But you have to remember that when beavers get to be 2 to 3 years old, they go off and seek their fortune. They have to disperse and they go at least 2 miles away. So I like to think we changed the population of beavers all over the Bay Area. We got to learn a lot about beavers because of what happened in Martinez. And one of the things we learned is that beavers are a keystone species. They have a disproportionate effect on the creek they live in or the stream they live in. And they do this because the dam traps sediment and organic material, which gets broken down by tiny bugs, tiny vertebrates we can't see. And those vertebrates get eaten by bigger bugs, better bugs that we can see. And it's also important to remember that beavers are constantly moving and removing mud. So they're scraping it up the pond floor and they're dumping it on the dam or lodge. And what this does is change all the bugs that we've got in Martinez, but it also changes all the things that eat bugs. So we get more frogs and fish and birds and all kinds of wildlife at the Beaver Dam. And that was true even in an urban setting. We never, for example, used to have kingfisher or green heron at the beaver pond. Now we see them all the time and they're breeding in residence. Even our mallards produce better clutches and better surviving clutches because of the changes the beavers made. And it's great because, like, if kids come down not to see the beavers one day, they might not see the beavers, but maybe they'll see the herons or the baby ducks or the muskrats. Our muskrat population really changed when the beavers came. It's really fun to be able to go to your urban creek and be surprised by what shows up. One of the things we really enjoyed was that we saw more river otters. River otters, as it turned out, like to use the pipe of Skip's flow device like a kind of tunnel or water slide. So they go through that pipe and they come out up and over the dam, and then they would fish inside the filter or basket. See his little head popping up? And one of the reasons they do that is because the fish can get in, but the beavers can't. So otters and beavers are always neighbors, but they're not always friends. Otters are carnivores and they will take hits if they're small enough. So we see a ton of tail slapping when otters come around and their kits present. We were very surprised to see this little face in 2009. This is a mink. We hadn't seen mink in Alhambra Creek for 35 years. The mink moved in with his mother and siblings. Mink are definitely carnivores. And one of the things we noticed is, my goodness, we're not seeing very many muskrats anymore. I wonder why that is. Well, the mink's favorite food is the muskrat. So the mink's there for the muskrat's there for the habitat, and it's all there because of the beavers. Beavers are truly the trickle-down economy that works. So I was ready at this point to go around all over California, preaching the beaver gospel and teaching people how and why to live with this animal. But before I could do that, I had to deal with a 7-year-old mistake. And that mistake really starts with this gentleman. This is Joseph Grinnell. He's the first director of vertebrate zoology at UC Berkeley. And he said he published a pair of volumes in the 1930s. And he said in them that beavers didn't live above 1,000 feet in the Sierras, and they didn't live in coastal rivers. And pretty much there were only beavers in the Delta. And that's what people mostly believed for 100 years. That didn't really make sense to me because beavers live to 10,000 feet in the Colorado Rockies, and they live on both sides of the Grand Canyon, and they live all the way down to the Sonora River in Mexico. So why couldn't they manage California's bumpy hills? Well, I was happy to meet an archaeologist from the Bureau of Land Management who had actually come across a Paleo Beaver Dam during a dig in the Eastern Sierras. And he had the presence of mind to carbon test the wood from that dam. What he found was that the oldest parts of the dam were continuously rebuilt from 580 AD. And the newest parts of the dam pretty much were rebuilt up until the end of the fur trade. And that really gave me and my colleagues the platform we needed to go back and re-examine a bunch of the literature and all kinds of data points like rock paintings and ethnobiographic prints and place names and trappers records. And when you think about it, California was settled very late. So by the time the gold rush got here, the once ubiquitous beaver gold was long gone. What we found is that beaver were native all across California, of course, and except for maybe the Mojave Desert, and during wet years, they probably got there as well. We were able to publish 3 papers in the Journal of Fish and Game, kind of documenting beaver in the Sierras and in the coastal rivers. And hopefully that argument has kind of shifted in California. The other thing that we really did a lot of thinking about was the fact that, the biggest threat to beavers used to be the fur trade. Now that's not true anymore. Now the biggest threat to beavers in California is depredation. And depredation really has to do with there's an animal on your property doing something you don't like, and Fish and Game gives you a permit to kill it. And what we were able to find is that nobody in California is counting the number of people that depredate beavers or the number of beavers that are killed, but we were able to get a public records request to look at depredation permits in California. So thousands of beavers every year are depredated in California. They really differ according to county. And the number one reason that beavers are depredated in California, of course, are damage to landscaping. So a beaver's eating your tree or your rose bush, and you're not happy about that. That's actually, fortunately, a problem that's very easy to solve with a little bit of education. And that, for example, you can wrap trees with wire, you can paint them with sand, you can actually replant willow from cuttings. It's actually quite easy to do. And we're happy to be able to teach people the opportunities they have to coexist with this animal with very simple tools. Now, way back in Martinez in 2008, after that meeting, the city never officially decided to live with the beavers. They just temporarily stopped killing them. And we thought it'd probably be safer to, start a nonprofit and advocate for them and maybe even throw a party for the beavers. So we held the first Beaver Festival in 2008. It was a tiny affair with a couple wildlife groups and a couple hundred people came. but we have held it every year since then. And the Beaver Festival was in its 13th year this year, but we didn't get to have it because of COVID. But it's definitely turned into a wildlife event in Northern California. We have live music, we have children's activities, and we've tried to do a lot of education to teach people how and why to coexist with this really important animal. You know, the beaver kind of makes the neighborhood and all the other wildlife move in. We have an artist from Napa now that comes in and does a giant chalk mural at the event, and that's a really dynamic education tool. We find that putting a positive face on this, really engaging the community, really involving the community, helps us keep pressure on the city council, helps us put this into the public eye, and really give people a different feeling about beavers. In addition to the festival, the Wortha Dam also maintains the Martinez Beavers website, which has become kind of the clearinghouse for beaver information all over the world. And we're actually working with Sonoma State this year to put on the first California Beaver Summit. So really trying to teach all kinds of agencies and people about this. You're definitely all invited to learn about it. You're going to be experts after this talk and Bob's talk today, but there's a lot of things that are affected by beavers, and California needs to step up to the plate and learn this. So I'm Heidi Perryman. I definitely think the Martinez beavers were worth the dam. And I think that when beavers come to your city or your town, they're going to be worth the dam too. Thank you so much. All right.
Okay. Are we turning this over to Bob now?
We are. We're turning. Now we've done the local thing, and now we're ready to do the national thing.
Okay, Bob?
Yep.
Great.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So what we did in Wisconsin, we looked at modeling how beavers, if we restored a watershed. So we took the Milwaukee River, it flows into downtown Milwaukee, which is about 900 square miles. And so there's two things I'm going to show you today. One is going to be a video at the end. And then basically when you trying to establish what you could have had for beavers or what you did have in the past, what you're going to have. So the fur trade started here in earnest in the 1600s. And so this is a French map from 1775 when the tribes were here. But you've got to recognize that there were millions of beavers in the past across the landscape of the United States. And the only currency, the only credit card, the only value for trade goods was beaver pelts, which were used for making hats in Europe. And so this fur trade was very active for Indians wanting blankets and steel, scissors, needles, guns, hatchets, tools, pots and pans. And so as this changed across this landscape, this was a thing that drove really a lot of the earliest expansion in the United States. And the beavers were very common in Milwaukee and Green Bay and throughout the Western Great Lakes. In fact, because we have quite a bit of rainfall here, we probably had one of the densest populations in the lower 48 in the Western Great Lakes. Beavers are unique, as Heidi was telling you, that they have some really interesting evolutionary adaptations. One is they have this iron oxide in their teeth, which sort of works as chisels and they wear down. And this is their primary method of feeding. They can take the sugars from the Cambrian and digest that and extract for food, but 90% of their diet really is herbaceous plants and aquatic plants in wetland communities. So if you look at a structure of a beaver lodge, you have entrance, but they have these tunnels, and they also have basically canals that they go off to different areas, and then the dam. So this is sort of, think of this as the castle, and this is the moat, and this gives them safety to go off to various areas to feed and in the areas around their dens. Prior to settlement, all the rivers in North America looked much more like this. So this is a map from 1868 showing this is a series of ponds on creeks. And so many of your first order and second order streams, the smallest little creeks, some only a foot or two across, were dammed up, and this was the structure. And so the hydrology was completely different in pre-settlement. So if we go back to 1600, hydrology across the United States was very different. So this is what a beaver dam looks like from the air. And this is actually flying over that same area of the map. So this is where the dam is right here. And these are some of the channels that go off to the side on either areas. And this is where they will go off into feed. So you have these in a series across the landscape. So when you have this, you, for one something, really have a series of steps, because as the gradient of the river goes down, and each one holds water, increases the groundwater, and then there's a filtration. So this percolates back up into the next step, and you have stream complexity, and you have also a stability of this. So it's like a structure of more 2x4s in your house. When you have a stream that has beavers in it, this is during the thaw, taken at the exact same moment. This is a stream a couple miles away with pretty much de-beavered, and this one is in a beaver complex. This is flowing out clear, and this is rolling up. So the sedimentation and the erosion is worked on it. This is another area from this air showing that same, a different area that's streamed in the series. So this is how they flow, and you get all this water off on either sides of it. When you do have this immense amount of water in the landscape, basically you're getting these wetlands create biodiversity, and that biodiversity gives habitat. You start out with the smallest biota bacteria and small cellular things in the muck, and then you go up the food chain. So you're getting plants, aquatic plants, you're getting insects, mammals, a huge amount of bird life. So these are some of the richest ecosystems you have in North America are your wetlands. So there are akin to our rainforest or our coral reef in terms of biodiversity for density. You also, when you get that, you basically create conditions to increase the carrying capacity of the land. And when you increase that, your predators, such as these on this side, will be present, because these territories that they have, because there's more food here. It's really, and that predator also creates sort of a counter pressure, and it regulates some of the structure. So home territories of predators and the routes, at least in our northern area where you're more wilderness, they basically go from beaver pond to beaver pond to beaver pond. It's like you going to the bank, the grocery store, the hardware store. This is their food source. So water is really life. And these are two, this is close to Gabriel's cabin in northern Michigan. There's two beaver lodges here and here. And this is a more matured system because a lot of the trees that would have been here are down. When you have a mature system, it can be counted which ones are beaver active by flying over it in the fall. And where these arrows are shows places where there's active beaver lodges. And if they get mapped out and extrapolated, for example, this is Voyageurs National Park, which is a newer national park started in 1976, but it has one of the highest densities. So every one of these dots represents a beaver colony, an active family that's there. And it has one of the highest densities of beavers in North America at 32 beavers per square mile. But there's some interesting things in there when you look at the relationships of the symbiotic relationships with other animals. So there's 31 great blue heron rookeries in that across that landscape of 525 square miles, but they're all in beaver ponds because they create conditions that are ideal for them. So you get this as a keystone species, you're getting habitat relationships. So you get these beaver structures, you click over and how that basically creates great habitat for great blue herons, but a lot of other things spin off from it. And for instance, 82% of the osprey nests in that complex are all in beaver ponds. So when you restore, if we had beavers back in the landscape, we really would be restoring a natal hydrology. And that gives the streams much more resilience, improves water quality, adds a stability to the system, increases biodiversity, and we are on what's referred to as the sixth extinction. But also significantly, you're getting significant reduction in flood reduction, which is a response that we can have to climate, which gives us some resilience in our streams. So you get the beauty of the biodiversity, and it's triggered by these small structures that could be in the thousands within a watershed, or larger ones, like this is about a 40-acre one, a pond, which happens to be in northern Wisconsin. But with climate change, we have a lot of instability, and we have a lot of carbon in the atmosphere, and we're getting rougher weather. And in that weather, we're seeing things, we're getting these storms, but we're seeing things such as in the Midwest, we're getting what's a type of pattern called cell storms, where we get a very heavy rain in a very short time in a very intense outpouring of water, a small pocket. So this happens to be Richland Center, Wisconsin, where we had in 2 days or 3 days, we had 2 big rain events, and you're getting more rain events in addition. Wisconsin Dells had 11 inches at one point, and this is all in 24 hours. So when you have that, you overburden the system and you cause the flooding. And floods are extremely expensive. This had happened in Ashland, Wisconsin, where 8 to 10 inches of rain fell in 2 hours. And this happened, it's a 134 increase. So it went from 300 cubic feet to 40,000 cubic feet in 15 hours. And this actually happened, they call this a 1,000-year event, but it happened twice within 3 years. If you remember in Houston, going back to 2017, there's 2 feet of water in 24 hours. So we started doing a study with Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District here. My cursor is popping forward, so I may go back and forth a little bit here. But MMSD is the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District, and I work with 2 researchers from the University of Wisconsin to look at the hydrology of the Milwaukee River watershed and do some simulated modeling to see how, if we had beavers back in the landscape, how would it change the landscape, and how much would it actually lower flooding levels? So the Milwaukee River Keeper is an organization I started in the mid-90s. Its mission is really to protect and improve, advocate for water quality and riparian wildlife habitat, and for sound land use within the Milwaukee system. So this is about 900 square miles, and it has a number of different branches in it. There's one's called Cedar Creek. And then we used, and then the Kinnickinnick and the Menominee and Milwaukee. And then we used some tools. One's called a Beaver Restoration Assessment Tool, a BRAT, which was developed by Joe Wheaton. And then we also used a bunch of other things, but basically what we ended up doing is we modeled by placing in locations that we identified in 52 spots. We ran a computer model we took storm events from the past, used those, and then we lengthened those into, let's say, 6 hours or to 24 hours in length. And we took rain events that were a 5-year high, a 10-year high, a 25-year high, or a 100-year event. And then we put at these 52 locations, we put 3 hypothetical beaver pond dams, similar to these that you'd see there, but it's a simulation, or what they call a synthetic event. And so it's a 0.5 meter, a 1 meter, or 1.5 meters. So there's a tremendous amount of data. This fairly complicated map on the side here shows the locations in, we did 52 locations. And we basically divided the river into a lot of different pieces. And then you add in land surface data such as vegetation, what the percolation was, soils, And then you add meteorological data, and you have to take it also into evaporation. And so when you run these models, there's a little bit of tweaking that has to be done to make them realistic. Compared, because you could tell from past data how big the flood was. So we also used GIS data to figure out the ecology of it and see what would have been the pre-settlement potential for beavers. And so we used this tool, which was an ArcGIS collector. We could go to a site like this one that happens to be a beaver lodge right there, note it, take some pictures and put some data. And so we ranked, we took 163 sites and we ranked them from 1 to 5. 4 and 5 were either good to excellent for beaver potential. And then from those sites, we put in the hypothetical beaver ponds or beaver dams. So we broke it out into the Milwaukee River. It's an east-west branch. This is part of the branch up into this area, and we looked at different wetlands. This is actually just a hypothetical dam at that point. And then you break it down even further. So you take it and you subdivide the landscape into these sub-basins. And then each of those sub-basins have data points as to how big the wetland area is, what percentage of that area is wetland, and how many river miles. And this is how you calculate how many beavers would be potentially on that landscape, provided there's something to eat. So we did this also in the North Branch. We did it throughout the whole system on all the sub watersheds. And this is just also breaking that down to show you what's there. And the same data. So we had 8 people working on this team. And then we came up with 14 recommended relocation sites for reestablishment of beavers to place them in. So these are sites that had good feed, good sites. So some of them would look like this. And this dark green here shows you the scale of some of these wetlands. And this is actually a couple thousand acres. And this point right here is really just a small spot right down here in this elbow. But in the northern part, they were virtually extinct because our Department of Natural Resources is still running a fur trade. So even though they're virtually extinct, beaver season is 5 months long up in here. And we've made attempts to get them to change their policies. So we were kind of looking into the past to try to find out where these were, and we were looking for these sorts of middens. So when we were done, in the end, we ended up with, we tallied up that we could have about 4,563 beavers in 840 colonies across this landscape. Because it's unique, it has 89,000 acres of wetlands. And so for one family, that's basically but just one colony for every 100 acres. So the area actually is ideal. And probably one of the reasons Milwaukee was probably settled was, one, it had a deep harbor, but it was also very rich in furs. But they were somewhat extinct locally by 1730, and we weren't really settled until the 1830s. So the memory of that, sort of an ecological amnesia, they were gone. But and the few we have, which we have maybe about 40 in total, those are very valuable in terms of genetics to recolonate this landscape. So we've been focusing a little bit on trying to get the DNR to protect them and let us help it. So the other part is looking at the processing of how you figure this out. So for instance, this is a place where there's a beaver dam here, and under here is a sort of a three-dimensional piece, right, using this of what that pond would be like. And we know we would end up with like a 60-acre pond there, depending on the height of the dam. And then we have the stage rating. So these are reservoirs of water that are held within the system up in here. Here's another one that we did. For instance, this happens to be on Cedar Creek area. And so you end up with a dam of another 60 acres or so there. And this one's a 49 acres. So you have, as these, during an event happening, these fill up with water. I mean, they're already filled up with water, but the sponginess of it. So this is sort of like speed bumps or storm detention ponds, if you're familiar with those. So if you thought of it, the analogy is going along with a roadway, as water is delivered, Basically, this is the results. This is without beavers, this is with beavers. So you end up cutting significantly. And there's also a lot of wear and tear on infrastructure here, culverts and bridges. So this is how much they mitigate the system in each of these graphs. So these are different stages. So, and this is how they would affect various towns. So if you end up getting a discharge at this level, you're cutting off somewhere around 40%, in some cases 50%, in some cases 60% of the peak flow. And the peak flow is where damage happens. And so we did this throughout there were hundreds of experiments done in terms of running these models to see what they would show. But this was the end result that you can see that this difference, that how they lower, and this is just the mitigating fed the flood. So you don't prevent floods. Floods are going to occur, but this is a way to sort of shore ourselves up for future. So in essence, the average throughout the watershed, you're getting a 37% decrease in peak flows in, let's say, a 6-hour rain, which is a 10-year thing. And then on a bigger flood, actually, as it gets bigger, you anywhere from 36 to 46%. So basically, the hypothesis was that beaver dams would also, even though they're further away, up to 75, 80 miles north of the city of Milwaukee, they potentially lower the net effect in Milwaukee significantly, avoiding it being flooded, as well as the 28 suburbs that are around it. So this is just a simple little graph that shows that basic peak flows with and without beaver dams. And this is this difference. But over in the far side here is also when you start to get into these upper peaks, this is where maybe you start to rip out a culvert. Here's where you rip out the bridge. Here's where you flood the town. Here's where you wreck the town. So when you have the stabilization of water, that's really what they can do for you. So the flooding damage, this is a simulated illustration of what Milwaukee looks like with about 10 feet of water in its downtown. So when you ruin a city, it's ruined for a long time. So you see what's happened to Katrina with New Orleans and other major cities. You just don't bounce back from this readily, especially if things are not that robust economically. So in terms of other areas to think about this, you think of California, you guys have had about 3 million acres burned, I believe it was last year. And so this cost is a public burden. And we have a town here called Beaver Dam, and they have a beaver on there. But to a degree, this is the fire department. This is the fire agent that you need. So this is also these fires I know are catastrophic for everybody out there. This is an example in Idaho. So this was a burned area, and this was a photograph by Joe Wheaton. And this emerald refuge. So this is the wetland effect of this burn. So this becomes a refuge for all the wildlife, but it also is sort of the place where all the seed bank is for recolonizing this whole landscape. So when you hold water this way, your land is much healthier, and we have biodiversity. I mean, beavers are a keystone species, but all species have some interrelationship to holding it together on the planet. So there's a friend of mine who's a biologist in Voyageurs National Park. His name is Steve Wendells, and he just sums it down to this: beavers are the answer. The question is irrelevant. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Bob. I'm going to open this up now so that everybody can see everybody else pretty much. We'll open up to questions. The traditional.
Yeah. We have one other piece. We have a short video, which is this other effort called the Bio Conservancy that Judy is going to queue up here.
Okay, Judy, you're on. Not yet, anyway. Well, while Judy's queuing up, let me just comment. We're going to have a Q&A in a moment, and traditional commentary, which is if you know how to put your hand up, electronically, you can do that. If not, you can do it physically, or you can just unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can type a question in on the chat. Okay, Judy, if you're on, we'll.
Not working. I tried this before and it was all working fine, and it's not working right now. My apologies, Bob.
Okay, well, maybe I can pull it up here. Let's see here.
Okay, let's see if you can. Great talk, by the way. And I
Oh,
have
thank you.
I get the privilege of the leadoff question. So well, while we're doing that, let me ask a question, if I might. And Heidi, maybe you could try and answer it.
Okay.
We are quite familiar as ecologists with the problem of runoff from the farms contaminating our watersheds.
Correct.
Okay. How do the beavers deal with that?
Well, one of the things we are learning from research is that beavers are actually improving. They're taking out nitrogen. They're getting rid of all the nitrates, all the runoff from the farms, and that is something that's really positive. And I'm gonna let Bob do his film, and I'll talk more.
Here's this. Here, I'm assuming everyone can see this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go.
A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. Paul de Leopold, a Sand County Almanac.
Can you make it a little louder, Bob?
Yeah. Try here. Superior Bio Conservancy is an ambitious plan to protect and restore the biological integrity and hydrology of the Lake Superior watershed and the Laurentian Forest Province. The goal is to restore and support its biodiversity, genetic exchange, ecosystem services, and evolutionary processes for future generations. This will be a healthcare plan for this bioregion of the Earth. Lake Superior is the largest and most important freshwater body in the Western Hemisphere. The Laurentian Forest is the Northwoods bioregion of the Western Great Lakes. It includes parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and Ontario. This is a high carbon landscape of more than 88,000 square miles and has demonstrated the capacity to recover its primary features. That high resilience can give the planet a significant drawdown of atmospheric carbon. The recovery of beaver populations, as well as wolves, is critical to preserving biodiversity, water quality, and forest health. Beavers, as ecosystem engineers, create wetland habitats for plants and animals. Beaver wetlands restore the hydrology of rivers by improving water quality, recharging aquifers, and stabilizing watersheds, which reduces flooding. As wolves have recovered, different species in the forest have recovered, adding to its rich biodiversity. Forests are stronger, healthier when wolves are part of the ecosystem. All the parts and pieces are needed to make the machinery of nature hum in tune. We will also effectively advocate for the creation of protected wildlife corridors to connect large tracts of public forest land to avoid fragmentation. This public land asset of federal, state, and county forest is over 33,000 square miles, an area 10 times larger than Yellowstone. This landscape also has a unique overlay of
of tribal usufructuary rights across the Ojibwe ceded territory. Those rights are sovereign and serve as a protective conservation easement for biodiversity on all public lands. Our collaborative conservation plan will utilize these covenants and aid in establishing a land ethic for the Superior Bio Conservancy.
That it, Bob?
That's it.
Okay, so now we'll open up to questions, and I will take my second question since I got my first one in. Bob,
Oh, can I
Bob-
just add an end to your question?
sure.
I just want to say that beavers are extremely robust to damage in their water stream. In fact, one of the first animals to recolonize Mount St. Helens after the eruption was beavers. And one of the animals that came back to Chernobyl after the explosion was beavers. So actually, beavers can handle our runoff, but they can actually also improve it.
Good. Bob, some of us who've lived in flood areas are well familiar with the Army Corps of Engineers power. Maybe not always for good. What relationship have your efforts had with the Army Corps of Engineers?
Well, we just finished this particular study in December, so it's just it's new. So we have just started to share it with people. We're hoping actually to. Joe Biden gave a executive order on January 27th, basically addressing climate change and asking for resilience and looking at methods to mitigate. And the agencies such as the Army Corps of Engineers or the Department of Interior were all supposed to come up with plans. So we're hoping to get them engaged in this and have, because it's actually using beavers for flood mitigation is the cheapest way you can do it. And it's the healthiest way we can do it. So we just have to have a coexistence, and we have to leave this paradigm of that these are nuisance or causing nuisance flooding. The same thing that Heidi has been bucking for 13 years is a lot of government or institutional agency resistant to change. And that's problematic, but we hope to engage people like the Army Corps of Engineers or the FEMA, EPA. I have a fellow from FEMA or from EPA, Brian Hemmel, who's kind of a cheerleader for us inside the agencies right now, but we'll see.
Okay, questions? Juanita.
Short question and then a real question. Heidi, you referred to the beavers in Martinez a couple times in the past tense, so I'm wondering if they're still there.
In 2015, we had a very dramatic response to the end of 4 years of drought, and our beavers relocated at that point.
Oh, sorry to hear that. My other question, more substantive question, is if we suddenly decided, okay, we think beavers are wonderful, we want to go gung-ho with this, obviously not killing them is a good first step, helping to encourage their habitat. But I just wondered what else needs to be done to make life for beavers more enjoyable, more attractive, and can they actively be moved successfully into new colonies? So.
The California answer to that is that beaver relocation is illegal. You can't move beaver in California, but that's different in Bob's state.
It is.
If we change the law, would they be happy to be relocated?
It's a complicated thing to relocate a beaver successfully, but it is possible, and it does happen, for example, in Washington and in Oregon. So, and it could happen. Definitely, the number one thing beavers need to be happy and safe is to not be killed and to have trees on the water. That's their two requirements.
You can move them legally here with live trapping, with pretty simply. And if you have forage, but as Heidi brought in Skip Lyle, having roadways and other places where you manage nuisance flooding, that's probably one of the more important things. So Mike Callahan is a beaver believer in the East Coast. He had worked with Skip, and he trains people in the installation of these, what I call landscape plumbing for beavers. And so you just want to be able to, and part of it is really sort of cutting the fear down if people think, oh, this is going to flood this or that. And with the program we're looking at in Milwaukee, we're looking at paying farmers to have water on the land. Because the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District, for example, wants to purchase about 10 to 15,000 acres in the next 10 years. And where we're putting these dam locations, even though they're hypothetical, if we planted willows and aspens on either side of it, basically that would be building materials for dams, and also it's forage for them. So when they build the pond, and they build really habitat, not only for a lot of other things, but for themselves, and become somewhat of a garden of forage for them, because most of what they're eating is these aquatic plants.
It's kind of a cyclical thing. You kind of need to start creating a friendly environment in which they come in, and then start expanding that environment and making it a better place.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gabriel?
I was, thank you guys so much, but I wanted to ask Heidi, are there any beavers around us here in Sonoma and Oakmont area?
Yes, there are.
Where-
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, where might we see them or get involved?
Well, you're not going to see them in the daytime, right? Beavers are nocturnal, so going in the evening or in the morning is great. And I would recommend not going until summertime, because you have a better chance in the summer hours. It's really hard to see beavers in the winter. So the flow devices that were installed in Sonoma were in a neighborhood behind MacArthur, sort of by the Sonoma Valley Hospital, on between Betancourt and Arroyo. There's like a little walking path where there is a creek behind it, and they installed 2 flow devices back there. There are also beavers in Napa that you have a chance to see as well. So they're definitely there.
Is there a website or anything that tells us where they are located?
I can send you the Google map. I'll send that to you so you can see, but there is no Napa Beaver website yet, or Sonoma Beaver website. I can only say there's a Martinez Beaver website. What can I only inspire as much as I can.
And I assume if you send us that, we're welcome to send it to the whole group here.
Yes, of course.
Okay, Lynn?
Yep. Thank you both for wonderful presentation. I had no idea they were such important part of our ecology. So my 2 questions are, do beavers have any natural predators, and do they carry any infectious, are they contagious? Do they have any, are they at risk for either human or other animals in terms of infections that they carry?
Well,
Go ahead, Heidi.
definitely the natural predators live with Bob, the wolves and the coyotes, and we do think bobcats are threats naturally. But what I would also say is people have been very anxious in all over the United States about the idea of beaver fever, that beaver can carry giardiasis, and actually what happens is that beavers carry it, but that doesn't mean they cause it. beavers actually poop in the water, but so do deer and elk and everything else. So beavers don't create that beaver fever. That just is an accident of rhyming, that it just happens to rhyme. Like if in like Norway, for example, the researchers I've talked to there, they've never even heard of beaver fever because in their language, the words don't rhyme. So basically it's diaper fever is what happens, and anything poops in the water that can cause it. The other thing that very rarely happens is, what is that disease called? The rodent disease, tularemia.
Yeah. You
Yeah,
can-
that can happen, but it's not common at all.
Right. You can have that disease that she's referring to can have kind of an epidemic aspect, and an area of beavers can die out from it. But all animals, including us, have some types of diseases or some sort of ailments that can get us some sort of bugs. So.
Okay, now I had a question on the chat, which I'll try and rephrase. The essence of the keystone nature of the beaver lies in the beaver's ability to build wetlands. And then the wetlands become the source of a lot of ecological desirable things. Is there any other animal that does anything like that?
Well, there's, to a degree, I mentioned this, I mean, beavers are something that we observe and can see how they can really change the landscape significantly. And there's all these other positive benefits biologically. But pretty much all animals have some aspect, but predators are all general predators are considered as a keystone species. For example, with wolves, we have in the Western Great Lakes, we've got a total of 4,400 wolves in Michigan, Wisconsin, and in Northeast Minnesota. And they regulate the deer a lot, which is the primary herbivore in the forest. And so they cause a behavioral change because they're on it, the same way that you might have seen things that happened in Yellowstone, how they affected the elk. And then once they moved the elk away, then the willows came back up in the streams, and then beavers came back to the streams, and also a lot of birds came in. So predators have a big effect on it. In the herbivore family, anything that is, affecting a larger landscape, we just noticed that we give it a keystone. But bumblebees have a key, or the honeybees that my wife keeps have a huge keystone event by pollinating everything.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a final question from the audience? All right. Well, I cannot thank the two of you enough. I've loved beavers all my adult life. This has been a great introduction to them again. As a reminder to everybody, next Sunday's speaker will be Paul Gullickson, who is the spokesman for the county, who will be talking both about the status of vaccinations here in the county and also about the nature of what happens as the color coding changes and we're able to reopen various activities. So look forward to seeing you next Sunday. And thank you again, Bob and Heidi.
Thank you, George, and thank you, Gabriel.
Thanks so much.